Fear is the mind killer, and this is what happens when a mind dies.
Science has never found a genuine transitional form that is one kind of animal crossing over into another kind, either living or in the fossil record. And there's supposed to be billions of them. Now, what I'm about to show you does not exist. These were actually created by our graphic artists, but I want you to keep your eye out for this, because this is what evolutionists have been searching for hundreds of years. This is called the crocodile. Can you see this?
God, I'm not.
Crocodile and a duck.
Every single piece of fossil ever found is a transitional form, from something to something else. You ignorant moron!
You are talking about the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind.
And this is what a brain sounds like when it's still alive.
In a blatant and desperate attempt to seem far more rational than they actually are, Christians and Muslims will often show you a list of famous scientists who believed in God, as if such minds are entirely on their side. For example, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Faraday are all normally found on such lists, giants of science who all called themselves Christian. But all of them died long before the atomic age and the discovery of the God-confounding mechanisms of pure chance that rule all quantum reactions. They never heard of DNA, spectroscopy, redshift, stellar nucleosynthesis. They never heard of protons or neutrons or the laws that govern everything these particles can and cannot do. They never heard of radioactivity and the window this provides for measuring the ages of rocks and thereby our planet. Newton, living 400 years ago, may have believed, as many Christians and Muslims still believe today, that life cannot come from non-life. But that's only because nobody in the 1600s knew that our bodies are made entirely from non-life, in the form of atoms. Would Faraday or Kepler, who endorsed the biblical creation story, had their minds encountered the explanatory power of the DNA molecule, the data behind the rates and causes of genetic mutation, the vast timescales involved, not to mention the highly detailed mathematics and observations that underpin 21st century cosmology? We'll never know, but there's plenty of statistical evidence to suggest that in the information age at least, the more you know, the less likely you are to believe that the creator of the universe cares what you do with your sexual organs, or which direction you pray in, or even if you pray at all. In an attempt to make up for this embarrassing lack of modern scientists prepared to sign up to an even partially literal interpretation of any holy book, the Christians and Muslims, or affiliated sociopaths, will tell you about recent surveys where many modern scientists have gone on record as saying they believe in God. But this too is extremely deceptive.
According to you Christians, or whatever the hell religion you happen to be, all of the intellectual, opinionated, interesting people with big ideas are going to hell too. So you guys are going to heaven, and they're going to hell. Personally, I think I'd rather go to hell than have to spend an eternity with people like you. No bueno. I'm thinking that, the party is definitely downstairs.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
You know, why believe in something that cannot be seen or studied? We'll say for the sake of argument that any deity does not exist. Now, with that in mind, let's explore some other things that cannot be measured, but the atheist still holds very dear. We'll go all scientific here at first. Gravity. Yeah, I know, we've all heard this argument before on both sides. You can measure its effects very easily. There are tons of formulas and theories pertaining to gravity. But wait, not only can you not see gravity itself, no one knows what it is or where it comes from. I've heard the theory of gravity being matter pulled into other dimensions, gravitons, and all sorts of really cool sci-fi reasoning. Bottom line is that we can measure its effects, but not gravity itself.
All right, so Laplace, Pierre Simon de Laplace, at the end of the 18th century, wrote a 5-volume tome on celestial mechanics. And what it does is it takes Newton's laws of gravity and brings them into a full expression with the hammer of calculus. He brings all the armament of mathematics to bear on the laws of physics that were put forth by Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton only touched on them. They were not fully developed. And in this work, he demonstrates, he further develops something that had been percolating in the mathematical community, but he develops, and one might even say perfects, a branch of math we would call perturbation theory, where instead of pulling your hair out saying, well, how do you calculate this pair of forces and this pair and this pair, and all the equations go to hell, in perturbation theory, it allows you to systematically and reliably calculate the effect of a small tug, a series of small tugs in the presence of singular big tugs. And that's kind of what's going on in most of the solar system. And when you do that, and you do that properly, you can demonstrate, notwithstanding effects of chaos, which have other timescales related to them, you can demonstrate that, in fact, the solar system was stable beyond the predictions of Isaac Newton. So, he figures this out, does not invoke God, because he figured it out. And in a story that may be apocryphal, but I see more in support of it than against it, this time coincides, of course, with the era of Napoleon. Napoleon, if you visited his library, it's not just sort of books of world history and battles, it's engineering books, it's physics books. This man wanted to know where his cannonballs would land. He was much more than just sort of a lucky general. He was into the physics, the engineering, and the material science of war. And so he immediately summoned up the 5-volume production of Laplace, read it through, cover to cover, called in Laplace, and said, "Sir," I have the exact quote here, Napoleon asked him what role God played in the construction and regulation of the heavens. That's what Newton would ask. Laplace replies, "Sir, I had no need for that hypothesis." And so what concerns me now is, even if you're as brilliant as Newton, you reach a point where you start basking in the majesty of God, and then your discovery stops. It just stops. You're kind of no good anymore for advancing that frontier, waiting for somebody else to come behind you who doesn't have God on the brain and who says, "That's a really cool problem, I want to solve it." They come in and solve it. But look at the time delay. This was a 100-year time delay. And the math that's in perturbation theory is like crumbs for Newton. He could have come up with that. The guy invented calculus just on a dare, practically. When someone asked him, Ike, how come planets orbit in ellipses and not some other shape? And he couldn't answer that. He goes home for 2 months, comes back, out comes integral differential calculus, because he needed that to answer that question. And so this is the kind of mind we were dealing with Newton. He could have gone there, but he didn't. He didn't. His religiosity stopped him. And so we're left with the realization, of course, that intelligent design, while real in the history of science, while real in the presence of sort of philosophical drivers, is nonetheless a philosophy of ignorance. And so, regardless of what our political agenda is, all you have to say is, science is a philosophy of discovery, intelligent design is a philosophy of ignorance.